welcome to Rootstem, and in this video I'm going to show you the basics of what I believe you need when you start to collect, build and paint wargaming miniatures. So, hello, yes, I feel like I'm going to be a bit of a glove puppet this time around. The camera is not in my face, but basically I'm going to be doing a video just explaining what I think you're going to need when you actually start first, getting into and maybe even collecting Games Workshop or Warlord or Mantic, just any sort of like miniature style game. And the reason I'm doing these series of videos is it's going to be something different than what I did last year, 2019. This is basically going to be kind of like a back to the basics, back to the beginning, your basics of this, that and the other. And I'm going to be doing possibly one for airbrush and then possibly one for your bog standard painting. So today, if you're an advanced player or an advanced collector and you don't need this video, you don't need to watch it. But if you're just getting into the realm, or you're thinking about getting into the realm of wargaming and you're not quite sure what you kind of need, this is going to be the video for you. So I'm going to start off by just letting people know some of the basic stuff that you would probably need when you first start collecting and building miniatures. Now, of course, paints, paint brushes, they're going to be a thing, but I want to be a bit more advanced than that. I'm not really talking to the children of the world, I'm talking to us man-children, us adults. So this is mainly for you guys. So what you need really is a suitable area for painting. I've got a particular desk-like area that actually has cupboards above it, and it's got a lot of my paints in there. This is the suitable area for me to be able to paint. Some people don't have this suitable area. If you don't, you can possibly use a dining table. If you are going to use a dining table, then I recommend that you get the dining table covered, so that you're not going to get things, you're not going to get paint and things a mess everywhere. Another good way of doing it is if you can get hold of some, it's like I think we called it, I got it from Asda once, it was like a tray, and it was a couple of feet wide, that had its own legs that separated, that folded down, which you could actually use if you wanted to paint while you're in the living room. Sometimes they're pretty good when you're painting in the living room, because then your missus doesn't complain that you're scribbling yourself away in some form of shed or spare room or not paying her any attention. So some of the first real tools that you need when you actually come across, I'm going to do this in stages. So if you've got your plastic miniatures or your metal miniatures, you're going to need to clean them up. You're going to need to start making them or building them. So you're going to need a couple of different things. You're going to need your standard clippers. These are some old clippers that I've got that still work. I haven't got a spring to spring back, but they do work for being able to get the clips out of the plastic. I've also got a scalpel blade. This is just basically your basic one. You can get an X-Acto knife, I think some of the Americans call them. But pretty much this is just your standard basic knife that you're going to be able to get from your local craft or hobby stores or Amazon, if that's the way that you've got to go. And of course you're going to need some glues. You really need, depending on the miniatures that you're getting, you need the appropriate glues for the actual miniatures themselves. I've got some, personally got some Citadel plastic glue. That's simply because I was in a Citadel store when I needed some. And I've got some Loctite super glue for resin and metal figures. And the reason I've got gel super glue is actually it's a lot easier to manipulate. It doesn't run everywhere, which can be quite annoying, especially when you're trying to put something together that's specific and then you've just got glue either running down your hands, your fingers, or even onto any equipment you're using to try and bond them together. Now, that's all right for your basic set. So you've got your glue, you've got your knife, you've got your cutting equipment. You're going to be able to get your items out, your sprues. You are going to be able to bond them together, and you're going to be able to build them quite adequately. If you're a little bit more advanced on that, you can get some tweezers. This is good for if you've got little tiny items that need attaching. I actually use these. They're not tweezers per se, but they're from, I actually was given for one Christmas a kit that was a metal kit that you had to sort of like assemble. I think it was like an R2-D2. That came in little different metal parts, and you had to clip them out and then bend them into shape. The item itself was no good. I didn't really like it, but this was actually quite a useful tool. So it's really good for trying to hold things in place if you need it on a little, you know, if it's very, very fiddly or it's in a really awkward position. And I'm putting everything on a card. That's just me. I also got drill bits. Now, these are really good if you're wanting to do anything such as pinning. That's a bit of an advanced technique, but it's something that you might need to come across if you're using metal models. I am saying metal. A lot of companies don't really use metal models now. We've moved away from metal molds and metal miniatures, which is a bit of a shame. I quite like the old metals sometimes, but resin seems to have taken over the place of a lot of metal. And the bigger companies, such as Workshop and Warlord, they have the money for, you know, plastic molding and injection molding. I think that's what the term is. So they are kind of moving away from the need for metal miniatures. You still get the fine cast and the resin miniatures, which are terrible. But these drill bits are a really good way to either drill some holes out of weapons, because a lot of weapons will sometimes come with a solid piece. It's good to be able to drill holes, you know, into the actual weapons itself to give it a more realistic feel. But sometimes can be used to try, if you've got bigger drill bits, you can use it to try and drill in so you can magnetize. Again, just another advanced procedure, but it's something that you've got to think about sometimes for the future. And you can also do it for what's called pinning. Now, pinning is an old school technique where you would actually drill into one side, say it's a big giant wing from a dragon. You drill into the wing at one point, or maybe even 2 points, and you put a bit of metal rod in there. You just make sure that that's about the same size as the metal rod, and then you make sure there's corresponding holes on the miniature. And then when you super glued it together, not only did you have the super glue holding it, but you also had metal rods holding the actual miniature together as well. Very useful. So yes, if you're just going a little bit more advanced than your normal setup, you definitely need some of these. You're also going to need some files. I have a large file. That's actually good for any sort of plastic and metal. I tend to have a large file like this so that if you've got some feet, I can just put them on and rub it straight across, giving it a very flat surface. I've also got this. Now this, it's a very old, I can't even remember where this came from. It's got little knives on it, which are very blunt, very useless. It's got a bottle opener, which for you advanced gamers is cracking. It's kind of opener, and it's also got a little file, and this little file has come in very handy for me. So having a smaller file and a larger file, depending of course upon the miniatures that you're working on. If you're working on smaller figures and you just need a little bit of filing, that's going to be quite cracking. If you're working on some larger miniatures, you're going to need this. That's my sort of what you kind of need. Sometimes as well, having cocktail sticks is a good idea. I get these packs from Amazon. I think I got like 200 of a damn thing, so £1.50. It was insane. And this can be quite good for just putting a little bit of blue tack on the end and maybe sticking a model on there if you're actually painting it or you're spraying it. You just want to keep it away from the rest of the miniature. So having some little form of disposable wooden stick. I know we don't want to get rid of stuff nowadays, but they are quite reusable, to be honest. As long as you're using blue tack, you can even sort of super glue something straight to the end on a little tiny bit and then break it off if need be. But that, to me, is kind of what you're going to need for your basic setup. You can always add a colour wheel. This was one from Green Stuff World. This sometimes gives you perfect ideas. It's always alright to try and go opposite if you can, especially when you're painting Space Marines. Two-tone colours tends to work quite well. So the next thing to talk about really is after you've kind of build the figure, then you're going to need to paint it. So we're going to go, I'm not really going to go into paints, but I'm going to go into brushes. Now this is quite a large collection of brushes. This is some of the brushes that I tend to use. Some that are incredibly fine, if you can see the end of that, reflecting. And some that are old and kind of worn away, and they're really good for stippling. They're really good for just basically putting on a hell of a lot of base coat if you just wanted to get some gloopy, thick paint on there and you're just slapping it on for whatever reason. These are old brushes that I've kept, so it's always a good idea to try and keep your old brushes. If you don't have any old brushes, you will have eventually, so just get some cheaper brushes, just that, you know, eventually you end up going to replacing. I do keep spares of some of these as well, so once this is for an example, once I've gone through using this, I always try and keep these to try and keep the nibs nice. Once that itself would have been one of these, and then that would have turned into that eventually, and then I get rid of that one, keep the other one, get a new one, and the cycle of the brush life continues. If you're going to start out, I would recommend possibly a brush very similar size to this Italia number 3, and then possibly a Games Workshop small base brush. These two brushes would give you, they're not a large surface brush, but they give you enough control. And the Games Workshop one as well, there is some other versions. I think there's Villaggio ones that you can get hold of and some other brushes, but it's kind of like a small tip. I'm not wanting, you don't want something that you just can't get into the small details for. It's very annoying when you're trying to start to paint that you're just splashing paint everywhere, or you're not quite sure what you're doing. You just end up getting paint wherever getting paint wherever you're going to get it, when you really want some fine detail control. As you get more used to your actual painting, you may want to add a shading brush. Other companies do this. Again, a lot of my stuff is whatever's available in my local hobby store. It tends to be these Italia or Games Workshop brushes. So you want kind of like a shading brush. I've got a medium shade brush, which I do majority of my shading work in there. If I'm doing a smaller shade, I just tend to use the small base brush, and the reason for that is because it gives me the detail accuracy. There's not much difference bristle-wise between them two. It's just nice to be able to have a brush that is dedicated for shading. I do have a large shade brush as well in my collection. That's for tanks. Again, some of this will be situational. So if you've got larger figures that you are wanting to paint, you're going to need larger brushes. I've also got a large dry brush. And the reason being is, a lot of the time when I'm dry brushing, I tend to do a large surface area. I've also got a very small brush. Now this is just a size 0 that I've used in the past, and then of course bristles have gone away. I have then used it as a small dry brush. I even in my collection have one of the sort of original small dry brushes from Games Workshop. That's very tiny. And then you're just wanting to advance onto, that's a 4/0 brush. This is very fine detail. These are things that I use for when you're wanting to paint eyes. And then I just keep growing and growing my collection until I've got quite a few. I do also have one of the texture brushes. I think they're called texture brushes from Citadel. This is pretty good for when you're wanting to slap on certain paints that aren't really usable with a soft bristle brush. Such as like the texture, your homemade textures, maybe even moving glue around, because it's just easy to wipe off the end of, and it's not going to soak into your actual brush. Always advisable when you've got your brushes is to make sure you've got a palette. Now this has not been cleaned, but this is just a very cheap palette that I've got from a local, I think it was called the Works store near where, it's like an artist palette. I think it cost £1. So that will be less, probably just over $1 if you're American. And this is just perfect just for putting a bit of your paints on. If you've got a drop of paints, it's brilliant for putting little bits of paints in. And it's perfect just for making sure that you're getting the right consistency. I always have, because I've got my water here in my broken mug, which I've had for years. Always make sure you've got some water handy. And I also, as a little side note, I sometimes put some water in an old floor improver bottle. Or if you've got bottles like this, or you've got an old paint bottle that you've cleaned out, it's quite handy to be able to just drip or drab little tiny bits into a section if you're needing a good concentration of water. Also, to accompany your paints, sponges. Now these are just sponges that you get in carry cases. And as you can see, what I've done there is just to try and create any sort of stippling or dabble effects. These come in incredibly handy. So if you get hold of any brush, it's part of your kit, as it were. Again, this is some more advanced stuff, so if you're going for the dead basics, just go for the brushes and the palette. You don't really need all of this extra. And then if you wanted to progress from that point, wet paletting. Now, hopefully, this is a homemade wet palette. I will try and keep a link below to my video on how to make this. It's very easy. And if you do decide you want to go from your, don't rush straight into this stuff. Go into your basic painting first, and then move up to wet paletting, and then move up to, even progress up to airbrushing if you're wanting to. But wet paletting seems to be quite a thing at the moment. It's a nice little bit of starter kit. And of course, you should always make sure you've got a bit of items for basing. So basing materials. basic material wise for me is a big bag of various substances. Now this is some sand. It's got some particular grit from all over different areas. I've gone onto Amazon. If you type in like miniature or basing materials, you can get quite a lot of this stuff. Maybe even little bits of coal that I've put in there from hobby stores. Some of the stuff you can get for model railways is perfect for your actual basing material. I paint my bases. So when I've actually built a model, I glue this stuff on and I paint over the top. If you're not wanting to do that, there's a lot of coloured textured ones. I think Luke's APS, that's a really good one to have a look at. They will show you, they actually got some particular bases that are just very easy to use. You just put some glue on your base, chuck it straight on, and it's done. You just let it dry and it's done. You haven't got to mess around with any basing. So it's always make sure you've got some basing material. Mine's that. And then I've always got some grass, because grass works on anything, especially if you do like I do commission painting. Having a basic paint, having a basic base is natural to do for a lot of commission work. If you're doing the resin ones, it's going to be completely different. But if you're just having your basic, your bread and butter painting, having a good basing material is what you're going to need. Now, if you can have a permanent surface laid out, it's actually really, really good to make sure that you've got a cutting mat. Cutting mats last forever, pretty much. This is just a standard, about an A4 size cutting mat. I got this when I was in college, and I'm quite old now. Not quite old, but it was a while back, and this is still doing me proud. Cutting mats are quite resilient, and they stop slippage. A lot of times, if you are giving it a good cut, you're not going to, and then of course, score into something or even cut yourself, which is always quite handy to have. If you can get hold of them, normally they're quite cheap. And again, Amazon makes things so much easier to purchase than it did back in the day. You're also going to need tissues. Now, I'm going to talk about this because I have come across some areas where they've had dedicated painting stations, and the tissue that they supply is, because of course they just wanted to do it on the cheap, is the cheapest pile of rubbish I've ever come across. When you're cleaning your brushes, you need tissue that's not going to disintegrate and get into the brush. If you have a really cheap tissue and you put water on and then you put your brush into it, it sometimes deteriorates and starts becoming like fibrous. That fibres can sometimes get into your brush. Sometimes if you're using a brush to load up, say like an airbrush, those fibres then get clogged up with paint when you put in your paint, when you're trying to scoop more paint in. Yeah, it just ends up with a bit of a schmoz. So always go for some decent quality, not cheap. We're not talking Asda shades. I mean, I think we've got Charmel and Andrex in the house. I like to have a good quality toilet paper for my brushes. All the rest of it's Asda shades. Don't care what I wipe my backside with. But when I'm wiping the brushes and I'm cleaning up particular areas, I'm using a good quality toilet, a good quality tissue. I also use, I've got a couple of examples of me doing it here. I also use good kitchen roll. And the reason I use kitchen roll as well, which is is that this acts differently completely to that. This is more like a cloth, which can be, and it can be a bit more rugged and a bit more rugged. Now, as you can see from here, what I do use a lot of this stuff for, let's open it out so you can see, is dry brushing. So, and sometimes wiping off the excess. So if you've got really too much and you've thinned your paints down quite a lot and you're trying to put it on there, you can make sure that it's not dribbling everywhere, it's not running all over your brush. I also, like I say, use it for dry brushing. It's pretty good to dabble in and then really work it into the bristles. But also it's taking the paint off at the same time. Sometimes you still need to get your tissue and give it a wipe on the end, but majority of the time you can just wipe it off on this, test it on your palm, test it on your arm, see if it's picking up the edges and the highlights of the actual palm itself, and then you can just start putting it onto your model. You're not messing around. It's also really good as well, mixing it with this stuff for when you've got transfers. So put in your transfer on here, doubling it up or tripling it up or quadrupling it up, and then pouring your water on top will allow the transfer to sit and separate, and then it doesn't start floating around in a ball of water. You're not going to lose it. You're not got water running everywhere. It just sticks to this. Sometimes you need something else underneath this, maybe like your cutting mat. Or, this is probably why I've got this bit of card here, to be honest, because it actually does absorb a lot of the water, which is why it's warping a little bit. I know it's from Amazon. But yeah, you do... It sounds really, really stupid. You do need good quality tissue paper and good quality kitchen roll when you're doing this. Don't you go for the cheap stuff, again, because it'll just ruins. You just get it's something weird stuff happens. Now, some of you might also be asking, why is he wearing gloves? Wearing gloves because I'm also working on other projects while recording these videos, and I prefer to have some latex gloves on so that if I'm not going to get paint all over my hands. Sometimes with my job I have to go and meet clients, give them a good handshake. Having really scrubbed raw hands can be quite awful. It's easier as well when you're doing airbrushing just to be right, okay, my hands are a mess, glove off, new glove on, and you can pick gloves up really cheap. It's just something that I like to have gloves on when I'm actually painting. Trying to keep your area tidy. This is quite important. Let me see if I can get this off here. So I've moved the camera just to show you the area that I'm in. And of course I've got, these are some that are, they are made by TD Combat. Some of these. I don't think that one is. I think that one I actually purchased from a gaming convention. But these are like TD Combat ones that I've used to be able to store my paints. And you can see I've got a hell of a lot of Games Workshop paints, and that's the cupboard as well. So it's going out of a light. But in the cupboard it's got all my stuff. I've tried to keep your area as clean as you possibly can. It's not always possible. Dirty bit down here. But always try and keep your workspace as clean as you can. Sometimes I do have to use a bigger workspace. Thankfully, I've got the War Games Club that I attend, to be able to do the terrain pieces. But majority of the time, this workspace is substantial for up to, I would say, I've actually painted some really big models on here. So it's quite a substantial section for you to be able to paint a lot of your models. Now, I'm going to leave it there for this particular video. Simply because there's nothing really much else to talk about at the moment. As long as you've kind of got this setup ready, then you're ready to start building your first miniatures. And the next video that I'm going to do this is mainly just a setup video, just to try and show you what you kind of need. Nothing really too arduous, nothing really too substantial. Not saying, oh, you definitely need to buy this. But what we're going to do next is going to be showing you how to just take the models off the sprues, assemble the models, maybe even do a bit of cleaning on them. So thanks very much for watching this video. Please like, share, subscribe for future videos and future basic training videos. And we will see you next time on the Rootstem channel.